It must be so rewarding for your kids to think you're Batman.
I don't think that most people understand and realize how much compliance there is in banking to stop, human trafficking, terrorism, gun running, drug trafficking. As you start to investigate it more, you start to realize that there's a human underneath all this.
The general public don't think of people in financial services being emotional.
You think about going back at 9/11 and looking at how these things were funded. And that's where a lot of this modern day, anti-money laundering, transaction monitoring stuff came from.
Would you like to share with our audience around patterns?
Who is, on a regular basis, purchasing hotel rooms Thursday, Friday night, less than 5 miles from their home?
And what about companies, the corporate world, big and small? What can they do to make sure they're not inadvertently helping these supply chains in human trafficking?
You've got this nervous excitement like, hey, I've got something here and I've got to do something with it. Hopefully that just saves, somebody's life.
Welcome to Siren Investigates, the podcast that explores how we keep people, assets and networks safe. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Reid, a seasoned financial services executive with much experience across financial services. But today, we'll be talking a lot about human trafficking and the intersection of financial services and human trafficking. Robert's currently Chief Operating Officer of the International Bank of Chicago. He's also the founder of Reid Advancement, a strategic advisory services firm. He is on the advisory board of MOV, an innovative student-focused platform. Previously, he was managing director for Forensic at Ancuna. He was director of global operations at BMO Capital Markets, and he had leadership positions at JP Morgan and at Options Clearing Corporation. So, Robert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you having me on.
Looking forward to the conversation. So first of all, you've had a fantastic career at the intersection of finance and compliance. And just talk to us about what first opened your eyes to the issue of human trafficking. That's an interesting thing to come across in your line of work and, some of the biggest financial institutions in the world.
It's interesting. It's not actually where I started to see human trafficking becoming an issue early on. I think what's interesting about the financial service industry is it wasn't even really on their radar until 2010 and a little bit later, because there was so much more going on with other topics that needed a handle on first, with terrorism and drugs and everything else. So it really didn't get on the radar till later. But where I really started to pick it up is my wife is a counselor for sexually abused kids and PTSD. And that's where I started to come across those types of events like Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, which kind of led into, seeing what was happening in the industry across the board and in counseling and things like that. So I really got my first taste of it and how horrific of a problem it was through that channel first. And then we started to kind of see it in the late, we'll say 20-teens, it becoming a major focus of the financial institutions.
Fantastic. And then at what point did you say to yourself, look, I can't just observe this from a financial services perspective. I need to get involved to try and stop it, Yeah,
that was right away. It's one of those things where you have instances in your life where you see things, or you have moments in your life where you have children being born or things along that lines where you're sitting on the sidelines, kind of needs to change. I've got two kids. My daughter, the younger one, she likes to say that my bank job is my Bruce Wayne job, while my DarkWatch background and Reid Advancements is my Batman job. And I'll tell you that when you're working in financial institutions, the challenge there is the direct linkage between you and, say, the government entities that would stop some of these things is somewhat siloed out. And what I mean by that is you find something interesting, you're only investigating it from the financial service industry to a point where you file what's called a suspicious activity report, or a SAR. And then you throw it over this imaginary wall and you never hear about it again, most likely, right? It's they either come back to you at some point, they being the government, come back to you at some point and say, hey, give us more information, or you've given them everything you have and you're hoping they do something with it. That is good and it's needed. Don't get me wrong, and we can get into the ways that financial services definitely help combat human trafficking, but there is a point where you see things in your everyday world, and there's more you can do, and that's where seeing those things coming about and building out read advancements to help kind of combat some of that stuff. It really became an issue for me and something I wanted to do at a bigger level, at a more impactful level in an immediate situation.
Fantastic. And look, it must be so rewarding for your kids to think you're Batman,
I'm a nerd, so yes. The short answer here is yes. I'm a comic book nerd. I love this stuff. I love comic books, have all my life. So yes, the short answer is the fact that my daughter even understood the difference between those two characters was a win for me as a dad.
So the emotional side of it, though, when you first come across financial transactions that are deeply involved in human trafficking and harming children, what's the emotional reaction? Because the general public don't think of people in financial services being emotional. So obviously it hit home with you. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think after the crash, about a decade ago now, right? Financial institutions were deemed kind of the devil. We were all these bad guys out here just looking to make money, and I don't think that most people understand and realize how much compliance there is and regulation there is in banking to stop human trafficking, terrorism, gun running, drug trafficking, like all those things, and there's just so much. At first, you're kind of this, I would say, a nervous excited. You think you've come across something that might actually can help some people, and then you run it out to the most possible level of detail you can to give it to law enforcement to do something with it. So firsthand, when you find it in say transactional data or from some suspicious activity, you've got this nervous excitement, like, hey, I've got something here and I've got to do something with it. So you go through and you do what you can do. So I think that's the emotion that comes firsthand. Afterwards, and you've filed that SAR, you've contacted that regulatory agency to do what you need to do. It's kind of coming down off of a high for some degree. It's like you've come across something you're pretty confident is bad, and not always, right? Sometimes you think it might be, you can't get enough info to tell, but when you hand it off, it's like hopefully that just saves somebody's life, or it makes somebody's life better. And great if it turns out to be nothing. I mean, better we check it out and be wrong than not check it out and be right.
What are the things that somebody with your experience, with your exposure to this problem, without giving tradecraft away, what would you like to share with our audience around patterns that really need to go on a SAR, need to go to the authorities?
I think some of the transaction monitoring systems we have out in the business today, they do a decent job, but you've got to tweak them for your bank in your area. I hate to use the phrase, but everybody in AML will tell you that the world is based on a risk-based approach. And I think that what that really means is your bank is different than the other banks, which are in different geographical areas, having different socioeconomical issues and things like that. You've really got to understand your area. So, I think because of where I live, in the Chicagoland area, a couple of the patterns that you're looking for, first and foremost, are, who is, on a regular basis, say, purchasing hotel rooms on Thursday, Friday night that theoretically are less than 5 miles from their home. Right. And I don't mean the one weekend for you to throw your kid's birthday party, right? Where they can use the pool and everything else. I'm talking about consistent, patterns of this. The other thing that you'd look for in the financial transactional data is who is the beneficial ownership. Who has beneficial ownership if the account holder were to pass on or die or anything. You can find patterns there where madams have taken, we'll say, beneficial ownership of multiple girls' accounts, and they have no other linkage other than the fact that this one individual is the beneficial ownership of all these random accounts with different names, different addresses, different everything. So being able to dig into your data and look for some of those types of things, which may or may not get caught in your transaction monitoring system, I think is the biggest, things to do on an easy basis and run a query on to get that resolved.
Fantastic. And one thing I left out, was probably most relevant and important thing of your introduction was around DarkWatch and how DarkWatch recently has come together with the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, who we know very well for years. So tell us about DarkWatch and how it helps connect data. What data do you track? A little bit of your history with DarkWatch as well.
Sure. So I've been with DarkWatch for about a year. Been trying to help them on their mission to obviously stop human trafficking. I think what makes DarkWatch unique and somewhat powered by ATII is the enhancements we try to do to the data, right? Yeah, there's one thing to go out on the open web, scrape massage parlors, run your own algorithms, and say, okay, based on reviews and keyword searches and things like that, this place might be in a illicit massage brothel. But it's another thing then to be able to utilize some of the data that ATII has had, which is scraping the dark web and enhancing your data with that. And again, collecting data is an exercise. Enhancing data is the key. And that's where I feel a lot of the times the regulations around financial institutions really kind of fall down for us, because we've got to a point at one point in the four pillars of anti-money laundering that we're all required to do in the banking industry, where the controls and the data became such a collection of data exercise where we weren't really utilizing the data to do anything with it. It was just hurry up and collect all these data points. And it went so far at one point where the four pillars became five pillars. So they split out another component to make another pillar of an AML program, just to say, hey, you're not actually utilizing to do this, or to utilize this data to do this transaction monitoring or to find these things. You need to be doing this. And it's like, it took this long to kind of make that connection, right? I mean, maybe collecting data isn't the exercise that's needed. Maybe it's utilizing the data and forcing that to be the better use of our time and resources.
Interesting. No, that's a great point, Robert, because I remember, a number of years ago when I got involved with Siren, and I'm from a banking background as well. I'm back a number of years ago. I just always got the impression that people wanted to collect the data, fill out the report, and be done, right? Whereas, with what you're talking about and the culture, I've seen a culture change in financial services where, whether enforced by the regulator or whether people are being more proactive because they don't want this kind of transaction to infect their network and their brand and their reputation. It's just a very different policy around this. Is that what you're seeing, or have you seen that shift over the last number of years?
100%. I mean, it's more about brand and reputation now, I feel, than anything else. And I think to some degree, it's more about the regulators not being called out on missing something with the financial institutions. I mean, you can look back in history, and I've been fortunate or unfortunate, depending upon how you want to look at it, being at some of the right places at the wrong time. I ran J.P. Morgan's mortgage-backed security group a few years before the crash. Like, I happened to be at J.P. Morgan during the fall of Bear Stearns. So you look at all these incidents and you look at the regs and rules around them, and it tends to be more of an issue of what people think about the financial institutions than what really the financial institutions are stopping or are doing to stop some of this activity. And I don't know that I have a great answer as to what the fix is, if you will. But I do know that instead of it being an adversarial type environment where the regulators are out to get you, it should be one where we're all trying to work harder to stop this type of activity. I mean, that should be the goal, right? I mean, the goal should be to stop this, not get a bank so they miss something. It's to help everybody work together to get this. But we don't design rules and laws to do that. We design rules and laws to find banks and financial institutions.
Yeah, no, interesting. I was in Lehman Brothers today, went bankrupt as well. So I had people coming against me with boxes and TV cameras chasing them, all that kind of stuff. So
No, I mean, do you remember watching, the Lehman Brothers CEO on, on TV being interrogated by the regulators, and this really stuck out of my mind, especially after living through, Too Big to Fail with JP Morgan and hearing Jamin Dimon on the phone, talk about all the things you saw in the news. And I remember very vividly, the CEO of Lehman saying, "I have to pay for the SEC to have an office 2 doors down from mine. You're yelling at me that I didn't catch it, but why didn't they catch it? They got the same reports I did at the same time. Aren't you guys the watchdogs?" And then if you remember, everything kind of went silent after that. You really didn't hear about it after that. And it was interesting to me because again, it became more about reputation and not about actually stopping the illicit activity.
interesting. So look, I think both of us have lived through that regulatory swing from very light touch to very heavy touch. But when it comes to this world around AML, human trafficking violations, etc., do you feel the banks and the regulators are now on the same side as opposed to it being an adversarial relationship, or where is the pendulum right now?
I think it's closer to the middle. I think it's closer to where it needs to be than it has been. I think to some degree it's still very heavily handed on, the regulators coming down harder on us than need be on ticky tack things versus things that would definitely have an impact on, the illicit activity itself. I think the focus needs to shift from the ticky tack items to, making sure that we're doing the things we need to do to stop the activity, right? The goal again is to secure the financial system, not to make sure that somebody didn't, forgot to sign a document, that at the end of the day doesn't really mean anything other than a procedural, step. So I think that's where it needs to go. And I'm not saying everybody's like that from a regulatory point of view or all regulators are like that. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. But if you really dig into a lot of what you hear fines coming out for, um, you see some of it being very, very valuable and very, much needed to control the system. But then you hear some of it, and it's kind of like, really, do I really care? No, I don't, because it wouldn't have changed the outcome of anything.
Okay, so we're still there on that point.
I think we're still a little bit too far heavy-handed, in my opinion. It's not, it's not the complementary partnership in my mind that it has to be to really do this. It's still somewhat adversarial. And again, I don't mean all. I've been having some great interactions recently with regulators in my role, so I don't feel everybody's like that. But you watch the news, you read these articles. John, from being in the industry, you almost can't turn it off. You have to see it. You have to know what's going on. So you read this stuff, and it still just seems that we're not quite in the partnership I think we should be in.
Yeah, I remember at the time I worked with a guy who was reported to Dick Fold, the Lehman CEO that you talked about, and he met him shortly after the crisis, and there was a big rumor that he got punched in the gym, right? And the guy said to him, "That never happened. I have a security guard."
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so it was just like all these stories went wild at the time, but no, it's interesting. So on the technology front, with things like DarkWatch, ATII's data, how can technologies like Siren help, solve this problem and elevate, financial institutions' investigation stance?
Sure, and I think it's what you're doing, and I think it's what DarkWatch is doing. It's being able to utilize the open data that's out there, or the unique data that, say, a financial institution has in the Siren platform or with DarkWatch scans, and then enhancing that data to find more patterns. Right. At the end of the day, I get asked about AI a lot. We talk about AI a lot because we've built some AI at DarkWatch. AI should be helping us comb through this massive amount of data that we have access to. Instead, right now, AI is being utilized to create art and everything else, which is great. I mean, I'm not against it, but but I think we're kind of missing the boat as to what it could really do for us in some of the areas. And part of that's regulatory driven, part of that's cost driven, part of that's just angst at letting things work the way they should. But when you're talking about it more from a basic basis of what Siren and DarkWatch are doing, I mean it's having those data sets being utilized and plugged together to make correlations to actually get something through the system and find some meaningful information.
Given what you've seen from, the sophistication around organized crime, the constraints that banks are working under, does it ever feel overwhelming? Or how are we doing in this battle against the bad guys?
I think that anytime you build a mousetrap, somebody's going to find a way around it. I think to some degree, by nature, what this, financial industry is, right? I mean, anybody in the world can pull a download of the FFIEC manual that we live and, die by in the AML world and figure out the rules around it, right? I mean, whether you're talking about currency transaction reports and the thresholds, whether you're talking about suspicious activity reports and the thresholds there for filing, it's unfortunate and fortunate that this stuff is so open to everybody. So to me, uh, my brain, as my wife likes to say, is very, uh, siloed when I need it to be. And what I mean by that is I'm able to take and carve out an area, fix that area to what it needs to be, and then move in chunks. So it never feels to me like we're trying to boil the ocean. It's more about getting tactical, fixing things or making them work in succession, and then being able to step back once you have those components and putting them together to again add more meaning to the data and what you're doing. So no, I can't say that it really ever feels overwhelming to me. The victims is usually what overwhelms me. So one of the things that you hadn't mentioned is I'm also president of a 501c Traffic Free, and it's a Chicagoland anti-human trafficking org. We had an intake location until COVID, and the mayor of Chicago shut us down because nobody was going to traffic humans during COVID. That wasn't going to happen. So, sarcasm, of course, but now we do a lot more around education and, being a part of that and understanding where those components go into all those things. That's where it gets to you more from a feeling standpoint. When I'm in the data and I'm working with the data, it doesn't get to me as much now.
Yeah. So like anybody working in a field like this, it can be overwhelming with the kind of when you come across real life stories, when you're talking about drop off points, things like that. It's not abstract anymore, is it?
No, it's not, and that's where it starts to get to you because in the beginning you're looking at financial data, right? And then as you start to investigate it more, you start to realize that there's a human underneath all this, and that's where it gets to you. Like the data work itself isn't something that gets to me, but when you start realizing the impact of the human underneath it, it becomes something. So just to give a couple examples. We have a couple known cases where the DarkWatch data has literally shut down illicit massage brothels. So we have two instances, one from a financial service perspective where utilizing our data, a bank did a site visit of an organization, and they literally found women cooking out of rice cookers in the back parking lot and living in the building itself on cots in the back of the office area. The other instance was actually done through real estate. So somebody who owns a bunch of strip plazas utilized their data, and they found something they didn't like. They called in the authorities and actually shut down a brothel that way as well. So it's just data first, and then you see the human side of it, and that's where it kind of gets to you.
And given your background in global operations of large organizations, it must be interesting to see technology you've used in your career for running straight through processing, running back office systems, I'm sure running front office, all sorts of AI, because AI is in banking for years. It's not new. Yeah. So it must be interesting and rewarding to see that technology being applied to doing real good in the world. I'm not saying the banking world keeping the financial system going wasn't good, but it's a different type of good, isn't it?
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. I mean, 100%. Look. I mean, at the end of the day, you still have operations, right? And utilizing these tools for that operational piece is necessary so that the humans can do the real analysis and thinking. And that's where I think that the AI piece really kind of comes into play. Is it helps you get through these, massive amounts of data or massive amounts of transactions, and then the human has the time to do the analysis to make sure that AI is not missing something, right? I mean, as far as we know, we don't have Terminator level AI at this point where they're self-thinking and everything else. I say we don't know because we also didn't know that Dolly the sheep was a year old when they finally told us that Dolly the sheep had been a clone sheep, right? Well, it's interesting because I bring it up in a lot of the talks I give around AI is that, where are we really at with AI? And if you break it down, what a lot of people call AI is to some degree just glorified search engines. ChatGPT is nothing more than Google in a formatted, way back to you that gives you the information directly instead of giving you websites. So I'm not, and in no way, shape, or form am I knocking it. But when we think about AI, we think Terminator, we think iRobot, we think the movies, right? We think all those things, and in reality, as far as we know, we're not quite there. So I use Dolly the sheep as an example because Dolly the sheep was a little less than a year old when they finally announced Dolly the sheep, but they had tried 276 times before being successful with Dolly the sheep. So that was 1997. How many years was that before that where they had been trying to clone? And I'll take you a step further. We actually started cloning animals back in 1962 when a scientist actually cloned frogs, or tadpoles, I should say, from a live frog skin cells. So it's actually been around a lot longer than we know. I'm sure there's AI out there that we're just not aware of yet. It's coming, but yeah, I say what we know of, kind of in quotes.
And given that kind of change and uncertainty in the world, what do you find exciting in the world of data analytics, particularly when it relates to things like human rights?
Well, I think it's being able to again drop these AI bots, so to speak, into mass amounts of data and have them do analysis that humans just can't do. And I'll give you an example. We started building some AI at DarkWatch through what are called RAG models, and they're not much more than really just ChatGPT. The difference is that you can feed a RAG model different information that it wouldn't just have on open source, right? So you can point it to policy and procedure against, say, regulation. So from a financial standpoint, we had named the bots Sherlock and Moriarty. One was, the investigator, right? And one was the skeptic. And we would ask it things like, hey, how does the bank's policy on, say, customer due diligence react to, things like the Patriot Act or the Bank Secrecy Act? And Sherlock would come in and think about what you'd have to do as a human for that, right? I mean, just to filter down all the data through the regulations, everything else. Sherlock spits out its positives. Moriarty spits out its negatives. We built it so that they actually get into a discussion or a debate mode, and then they come to a summary. A human would take a day, 2 days to do that. It did it in about 11 minutes. It did it all. So you keep climbing those things. So, that's the piece where AI needs to come in and start helping, say, in the SAR environment, where in the United States, I think it was, 350 to 380,000 SARs get filed a month. I'm not talking branches. Chase has, thousands of branches. I'm saying 5,000 different financial institutions, I'm rounding, and we're sending out 380,000 SARs a month. I mean, that's not really discernible to get through. So if we can drop in the bots and say, hey, look for the patterns, look for the links, look for all these things into that area with a Sherlock and Moriarty. I mean, think about how much more it could do for human rights and the good.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic because I love your Sherlock and Moriarty. Ours is called K9. So,
Okay, yeah.
We're all going down this road with interesting AI partner names, but I love your comments around the SARS because it's one of the things that we see in the kind of criminal justice supply chain of financial institutions create a SAR And on the other side, there's never enough resources to deal with them, right?
Oh,
There's
100%.
everywhere in the world I've been, I've never seen, you're talking about the feedback loop into financial services. It's almost like, the very, very highest priority ones get action because that's where they have the resources, but everything else goes, unattended.
It has to, right?
And this is where AI and automated investigations can really come to the fore and not just have 380,000 live investigations, but these things are all linked together. It's not like these are unrelated transactions. They're all related. There's massive overlap, I'm sure, month on month with these SARS reports.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're looking for common addresses, you're looking for common, names, you're looking for common things to link all the banks together, right? I mean, it's no secret, as you know, being in the banking industry, that when the regulators come in, their random samples aren't totally random, right? They're looking at who possibly filed SARS before or after your bank touched a transaction and trying to determine if you should have known something was suspicious there or not. That's kind of how it works, right? And I'm being very vague in general to some degree, but in essence, that's where the falling down piece can come into play. But again, with utilizing some of these bots, K9, or Sherlock and Moriarty, I mean, we could just do so much more faster. And that's where it comes into play. I mean, from a timing perspective, when you think about the two instances I mentioned earlier, I mean, had it been 6 months later, who knows, right? Maybe somebody died because of the conditions. Maybe, you just don't know. So the sooner we can identify these things and get real resources on top of these things, the better off we are, whether that's through the financial service industry or whether that's through a Siren or a DarkWatch, providing information to local law enforcement to investigate.
Yeah. Have we got any better at data sharing? Because, we're talking about data sharing in this world for 20, 30 years, and it seems to be still problematic, an unsolved problem, or do you see us getting better at it?
No, I don't. I mean, we have 314, in the United States, right? So that's the financial information sharing that we can do. There's a system where you go in, you can see what banks you can reach out to. You've got to reach out to certain people, but it's not mandatory, right? So if it's not mandatory, and you're thinking about, again, a cost structure around trying to do all the things we have to do in banking, you're not necessarily putting a ton of resources on it that really need to be, because you can't possibly get through all the the requests as it is. So again, this is in my mind where AI can do the heavy lift, and pull the data, get the information together, and then you have a human that can pound through, double checking things before they go out versus, having a person have to go in, pull the request, pull up the information, download it, like there's ways where I see our technology and the data integration from the private side, like DarkWatch and Siren, doing this better. And it's going to be an interesting, I'd say next 10 years, because if Siren or a DarkWatch or somebody else can come in and say, we can do this better than you, the government, work with us, and we'll jump through your hoops, right? We'll go through your regs, but let us do it with them versus just this random, system. Then I think, again, that's where the power comes in.
And do you think regulators could make data sharing easier? Should there be more compelling of data sharing from what you see in the process? Or if you ran the regulators today, what would you do?
If I ran the regulators today, I would first make it mandatory. It's not mandatory today. I think where a lot of the regulations fall down too is it's really centered and focused around financial institutions only. And I'm going to get specific here with this because we're talking about human trafficking. The hospitality industry, whether we're talking about hotels or casinos or any of these other places where people go, and I don't want to say there's zero regulation around it, but financial institutions are required to OFAC screen everybody that basically does a transaction at the bank. And theoretically, if we're being honest, theoretically, if you're using your debit card at the hotel or the casino or wherever else, it's getting OFAC scanned at the bank at that point too. But the bad guys know that. So what do the bad guys do? They just use cash. They just use cash and they move on. Now, in all instances, can they do that? No, of course not. I mean, you can't drop $500,000 in cash onto a casino floor and then not do background checks and everything else. But the bad guys are smart enough to know where those thresholds are because we publicly broadcast them in documents all the time and do that. So I think they're missing it to some degree, allowing us to be a little more open with data sharing. And I think they're missing it to some degree with the industries that we're only being focused on.
Yeah. And for our listeners who aren't investigators, what should they be aware of? What can they do to help to combat human trafficking?
Oh yeah, there's tons of stuff they can do. I mean, you can't walk through an airport now without seeing, flyers or posters, whatever you want to call them, about being trafficked and numbers and resources. There's a lot of great companies out there that have programs where they help victims also get things like free phones so that they can dial 911 if they need to, things like that. So being aware of your environment around you and looking at something again where you randomly are driving down the street and you see women cooking out of rice cookers out of the back of a parking lot, being aware of those things and then calling authorities when you can, that's what you can do as the everyday person. That's where you kind of stick in. Watch around you and see, that doesn't seem right. And you hear, if you're looking for it, I should say, you'll hear stories about this all the time on the news, but you've got to look for it. It's not what makes the news on a regular basis, right? They've been finding pockets of kids again in some of these various raids that are going on. And that part's not really making the news, but because I sit in this industry from a human trafficking standpoint, I'm locked in on where that news would come from. So yeah, everyday humans can do this stuff, and that's who's pointing out these things to people, so that these kids aren't just gone missing and then shipped off to another country for whatever use.
Yeah. And what about companies, the corporate world, big and small? What can they do to make sure they're not inadvertently helping these supply chains in human trafficking?
Well, I mean, that's knowing your customer. I hate to bring it down to a KYC banking type situation, right? And that's where again the regulations just aren't sitting there for the entire industry to do. And do I think that companies like Nike, who manufacture shoes, need to be aware of it? No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about industries that have opportunity for people to be exploited, hidden, utilized, or used. Like hotels and casinos and things that there's so much going on and there's so much distraction around these places that you don't necessarily need to worry about being caught. So having everybody aware of those situations where something just doesn't look right and reporting it, that's where again they can really do something about it.
Yeah. And what gives you hope that we can meaningfully interrupt the human trafficking world in our lifetimes and really make a big impact? What gives you hope?
Well, I mean, the fact that we are doing it, right? I mean, again, so DarkWatch is just one company that's disrupted two of these things, and we've saved just 30 lives in that alone. And that's just the instances where our data was utilized and we know about it. That's not instances necessarily where other things occurred and we stopped it before it even got started because something looked suspicious. That's what gives me hope. And again, hearing these things and being a part of those groups that look out for this information, being a part of Traffic Free in the city where we help victims get resources that they need, who then can give information to law enforcement and data companies like ours, so that they know how to look for this data differently is the great way to go, right? I mean, when you think about something like 9/11 and you think about going back at 9/11 and looking at how these things were funded, I mean, that's where a lot of this modern day, anti-money laundering, transaction monitoring stuff came from, because we looked back and saw what they did. And then we looked at how we might be able to find that going forward. So it's getting that information and looking at the lessons learned from these instances and saying, okay, that's how they did it. How do we find that now before it gets out of hand?
And Robert, you've had a lot of leadership roles across a lot of organizations. So, and one of the things I know you use the word a lot is ownership to describe your leadership style. How does that translate into a problem like trafficking? How do you own a problem like that? Because you've many other responsibilities within your role, so it can't all be on one problem. So talk about how you manage that.
Yeah, I mean, it's being aware of what your industry is a part of and how you might combat it in those areas, and then owning that as something that is a priority for you in your role to find. So, I like to joke that I'm a recovering BSA AML officer and now the COO. But the reality is that if every BSA AML officer made sure that their financial institution was fighting that or looking for that in these simple ways through transaction monitoring, it has a massive impact. And I'm still one of those guys that believe that if you shut off the flow of funds, you shut off the flow in general, right? If there's no money to be made in it and they can't transfer the funds, then the rest of it's not going to happen because there's no money to be made.
And if when you speak to your peers, what would you obviously with your background and where you started your career in AML, it gives you unique insight. But not every COO in a large financial institution comes from that background or perspective. So what would you say to your peer COO is in other organizations across the United States about their responsibility and what they can do to help the human trafficking problem?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you can do, and this is kind of where I've always differentiated myself throughout my career, is that I understand the rules and regs around these items and what needs to be done, but then I also understand how and why to apply them in the operations of the financial institution. So it's one thing for banks to be required, on an annual basis. They have to take, all these different types of training, elder abuse, so on and so forth. That's another thing to have the COO sit in front of you at a financial institution and say, hey, these are the things to watch out for when you have people walking in the door. It's understanding why, you as a COO have the controls that you have in place for various items in banking, whether that's, filing a currency transaction report or again, identifying elder abuse. It's understanding those things and working with AML, if you don't have the background like I have, to understand what they think the risks are for something like human trafficking in that financial institution, in that physical location area, and making sure that you're on top of those controls and make sure that they're working appropriately and being followed so that you can help stop as much as possible.
Yeah. And finally, Robert, if there was one technology, real or imagined, it can be something that doesn't exist today, that would help make the world a better place, particularly with your perspective on human trafficking, what would that be? If you could imagine it into existence.
It's really the ability to have access to all the data and an AI bot to help find the stuff in the data. That's what's going to stop this at the end of the day. We as humans can't move fast enough with all the regulations and rules and requirements to get through things fast enough to stop it real time. And if we had these canines and Sherlock and Moriartys into all these different areas in these financial institutions, we go from filing SARS in 30 to 90 days to filing SARS the day after the transaction occurred, and you're going to get stuff stopped much faster. A lot of times, unfortunately, when we're looking at things from a financial perspective, it happened 30 days ago. Maybe it took you that amount of time to dig deeper and find it, to even find out if it was suspicious, and now you're looking at 60 days behind. And if we could somehow shorten that time frame with this, we'll call him the Terminator. Hopefully I don't get sued by James Cameron, but we'll call it this Terminator mindset of eradicating this type or finding this type of transaction so we can get it to the right law enforcement in a meaningful time period. We could probably stop more.
Yeah. Robert, it's been a fantastic conversation. Really want to thank you for joining the Siren Investigates podcast. We covered a lot of great topics there around how we battle human trafficking, how AI is going to help us, the role of regulators, your own experience from an AML analyst right up to the COO, the great work DarkWatch are doing, how DarkWatch and Siren together can help.
100% agree. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great time getting to speak to you and just learn more about all of this.